Well, welcome everyone to another episode of WA This Week. Look, we're winding down to the end of the parliamentary year and, you'd think you'd have a government in a position where they can sit back and relax a bit, but anything but the case for this McGowan Labor government. You can see that little by little they're starting to come apart at the seams. One area that we continue to pursue the government on, and I'll continue to pursue the government on, is the appalling deal that the government did for the sale of the Landgate properties in Midland. And we've covered this a little bit before, but they've sold that property to a private developer for a fraction of its cost. And then they've agreed to lease that back for 15 years at a value of $85 million. This is a property they've sold for $17.3 million. The government tries to spin its way out of this and say that somehow this is a good deal. Now, Hamish Hastie from WA Today has been doing some excellent work to dig into this deal and can I say has a way to go in revealing the details about this story. But what he did reveal this week was that when Treasury did or at least when government obtained a valuation for the property, the valuation they obtained for that property and upon which they based their sale price was one that in fact was the lowest value you could get for the property, and that is for an unoccupied premise without a tenant. Now, in that case, if someone's buying a property, it's unoccupied, it doesn't have a tenant, then that attracts a low value. In this case, the government knew that they were undertaking to lease this property for 15 years. And can I say the lease payment they've agreed to pay is at the absolute top of the market. So the government knew that this property had a blue chip tenant, that is them, and yet they accepted a valuation and they used a valuation which was based on the property having no tenant at all. Well, no surprise, they've obviously come out with a low valuation based on that. But this is just appalling incompetence at any level. Now, as I've said a number of times, I have no criticism of the developer in this case. Good luck to the developer. Boy, they got a cracking good deal. And clearly they're good negotiators. But I am absolutely critical of the government on this deal. They have incompetently cost you, that is, the people of Western Australia, tens of millions of dollars that is, money that could be used to solve a whole raft of other problems and help people in this state. Instead, they've just wantonly wasted that through as far as I can figure, is sheer incompetence. I hope it's nothing more than that, but it looks as though they're incompetent. The thing that surprises me is, look, someone's in government, when you're in power, sometimes you'll make a mistake. Sometimes things will happen and in hindsight you think it's something you could have done better. When that's the case, say it. I'm not going to attack the government for admitting that this was a bad deal. What I'm absolutely upset by, but also confounded by, is why the government continues to double down. They're hiding information. They're doing everything they possibly can to hide information. I've said to the Premier, because he said this is a good deal, if this is such a good deal, table the business case. It's not going to affect the company that's bought the premises. They've already bought it. And this, at the end of the day, is public money. So reveal the business case, show it to the public of Western Australia and convince us. Show me that business case. If it stands up, then I won't say another word about it. But at this stage, all we're getting from the government is spin to try and say this is somehow a good deal, and otherwise desperately trying to hide any information. Now, as I say, there's more information to come out on this deal. The Auditor General is also undertaking an evaluation of this sale. The Premier revealed that the Auditor General had done some diligence on this in Parliament this week. So absolutely waiting with bated breath to see that as well. The Auditor General is someone I hold in very high regard and someone who's doing a good job for the people of Western Australia. Worryingly, this week we've seen a continuation of industrial action by public servants in pursuit of improved pay and conditions. Now, I have no criticism of the public servants at all wanting to improve their pay and conditions, but I do have a big criticism of the government failing to resolve these matters with the public servants, particularly nurses and midwives. And now we see other public sector workers and also the police asking for the government to improve the offer that they've made. Now, you know, I don't want the government to waste public money, but I will say that I have a great deal of pride in the history of the Liberal Party and the National Party as a coalition government in relation to the public service, and that is, under us in the previous government, we had the best paid nurses, midwives and teachers in Australia, and our public servants overall were extremely well paid. You know, why was that important? Because Western Australia is, you know, the largest resources-based economy in Australia. There is enormous competition from talent, and we want the best people as teachers, as nurses, as midwives, and working in our public service, and that means we need to offer competitive salaries. Now, as I say, I don't expect the government to be profligate, but I do expect them to take the claims of the public servants seriously. More important than that, and this is something that's become really, really clear, if you talk to police officers, if you talk to nurses and midwives, and actually talk to them about the issues that concerns them, yes, like everyone, they're suffering the stress of rising mortgage rates, rising fuel prices, rising food prices. You know, they're people, they've got families, they want to put food on the table and be able to afford to pay their mortgage. But more than that, they want to be treated with respect in their workplace. And what's very clear when you talk to those nurses, midwives, those police officers, they don't believe they're being treated with respect. I mean, a survey of 2,000 police officers, that's a third of the police force, showed that 60% of them didn't feel that they were being treated properly in their job. And that's just a terrible result. I mean, you know, police have the most enormously difficult job. They come up against the most complex situations. And the one thing you want to think is that the people who are responsible for employing you are respecting you and are treating you properly. And it's very, very clear from discussions with those groups that they don't feel that at all. And that's a large part of the concern they want the government to deal with. Now, I've said to the ministers, go down and talk to them. What's very clear, when Minister Papalia and Minister Sanderson come into Parliament and they answer questions, and essentially they go, there's nothing to see here, this is just sort of grubby union tactics to try and, you know, strong-arm the government on the deal. It's patently obvious they are not talking to the frontline workers and not listening to them. If they are talking to them, they're definitely not listening to the concerns they have. So, you know, this is at the feet of the government. They need to negotiate. I think, you know, we had I'm told that the government who weren't going to change their offer have now sort of changed it 8 times, but they need to sit down, have proper discussions, recognise that our frontline workers need not just financial support, but they need respect. They need to be treated properly in their workplace, and the ministers need to knuckle down and deal with those issues. And I might say more generally in relation to this, one thing we don't ever hear from the government is talking about the efficiency of government workplaces. Now, over the last decade, the private sector has gone through an enormous effort to make their workplaces more efficient, more effective. Invariably, that means that you end up with workers who are more satisfied because you're eliminating frustration and waste out of workplaces. Where's that response from the state Labor government? You don't see it, you just see rhetoric. You just see them sort of running spin on the television and through the newspaper, but not knuckling down and dealing with the real issues. A local issue for me, as the member for Cottesloe, you're probably not aware because there's only a few sectors of the press that report this, but a development was approved at 120 Marine Parade, Cottesloe. Now that's right on the beachfront at Cottesloe. It's not far from well, in fact, it is on the opposite the main beach at Cottesloe. Now, I have said publicly on many occasions that I do think the buildings on the foreshore at Cottesloe you know, should be redeveloped and refurbished, and want to see more developments. Can I say in particular, things that developments that bring people into the area and provide an amenity for people who from right across Perth come to Cottesloe Beach. I mean, Cottesloe is Perth's most iconic beach. I suspect Perth's most visited beach. I'm a surf lifesaver down there, and you know, I see, you know, every weekend I'm down there on patrol, you see hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people coming down. So, you know, very popular place. So, you know, restaurants and cafes and, you know, shops that are sort of relevant to the beach. I think all of that is really great, and it's clear that some of the older buildings along the foreshore there, you know, could be better developed. Now, the Cottesloe Council, a number of years ago, developed what they call their Local Planning Scheme 3, their LPS 3. They recognised that, and they approved development along the foreshore to 5 stories on most areas, and then a couple of areas, Sea Pines and the OBH hotel site, some higher development there, which was a compromise. I mean, a lot of people didn't want sort of anything to go, you know, more than a couple of stories, but the council recognised and accepted, and the community did, that it was appropriate to have some more development to a higher height, but not something that would overshadow the beach. And definitely what they didn't want was to have effectively a, you know, one side of a concrete canyon, tall, just apartments that aren't bringing, you know, providing any amenity for the general community, just providing residences for some very wealthy people. But they wanted to see that, and they wanted that development to go ahead. But as I say, no more than 5 stories on most of it. And that was because they didn't want the beach overshadowed. They don't want people in the morning to be sitting in the shadow of a building. Now at Cottesloe, just as a detail, the actual marine parade is actually atop a cliff, if you like, on the beach. That's 4 stories high. So anything above that is simply adding to 4 stories already. Now the 5 stories meant it would go, as I say, to about a 9-storey equivalent. What was approved completely bypassed the council, completely bypassed the government-approved local planning scheme, was a 7-storey block of apartments. Now, you know, sure, that's going to make more money for the people that are developing that site. But they're going to go away with their money. But what we're going to be left with is a building that is going to cast an increased shadow on the beach in the morning. Now we see along Marine Parade 4 applications, all going to the what's called the Joint Development Assessment JDAP panel, and they are going to completely bypass the panel. Now, the JDAP has a pretty good record of basically passing everything that comes before it. But because this completely bypasses the council. Now, you know, Minister Safiotti, she wants to have it one way, then she wants to have it another way. In relation to Nedlands, where she made the most appalling decisions, just utterly disgraceful. It has the real potential to destroy the amenity of much of Nedlands in what she's done there. She said she did that because they hadn't approved a local planning scheme, and otherwise she would have left it to the council. Cottesloe's got an approved planning scheme, and that planning scheme recognises the need for development along the foreshore, gives some sensible compromise on height, and in a couple of locations it specifies higher developments that will be appropriate for those locations to give a mixed setting along that beach. What we're seeing now is, as I say, 4 applications now before this Joint Development Assessment panel the state government is using to bypass local councils, and we see right next to the 120 Marine Parade there's another one, another development application for exactly the same height. Now this is what I've talked about for some time, the exact fear. We're just going to end up with a wall of concrete along Marine Parade, and it's the state Labor government that's doing it. I mean, this is just appalling that, as you know, you've got Minister Safiotti in her own area. They passed an act of parliament to protect, you know, part of her electorate from development that they thought was inappropriate. But in Cottesloe, she's literally gleeful in parliament about this and mocking. But this doesn't just affect the people of Cottesloe. This affects all of the people from Western Australia. As I've said, Cottesloe is the iconic beach of Perth, and we've got a Labor government who is hell-bent on supporting inappropriate high-rise development that is going to affect the amenity of every person that comes down to the beach. Let's hope that this stops, but will honestly say I think the only way it's going to happen is if this Labor government is thrown out. Look, thank you very much for listening to WA This Week. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcast app, whatever it is. You can also watch the video version on Facebook, Spotify, or YouTube, and just search Dr. David Honey. Look, please share it with your friends and colleagues, get the message out, and otherwise please give us your feedback. I always say it because I mean it. Give us your feedback because we really appreciate it, and that just helps us in what we do. Thank you very much.